Welcome to Writing to Reach Your Audience, Plain Language. My name is Lisa Kazaku, and I'm a Senior Communications Specialist with the Texas Department of State Health Services, DSHS. Today, we're going to talk about reaching your audience. We're going to talk about plain language and the elements of plain language, and then we'll have a quick review, and I will give you some resources. You know, when we talk about writing to reach your audience, our ability to reach our audience is critical. And our audience's understanding of our writing is absolutely crucial. So when we talk about writing to reach our audience, there are many ways that we reach out to our audiences. Through the internet or intranet, newsletters, flyers, brochures, reports, email, letters, even social media. And how we write really dictates how our audience understands our message. We strive in our writing to write at a 6th grade level. And just remember, we do have to have all crucial materials translated to Spanish, which increases the word count by 25%. So build translations into your timeline. Our writing should help our readers find the information and help the reader understand the information. When we write in plain language, we do both those things. So let's talk about plain language. So first, let's talk about what is plain language. Well, plain language is communications that readers can understand the first time they hear or read it. Plain language means writing so your audience can find what they need, understand what they find, and use what they find to fill their needs. So why should we even learn about or use plain language? Well, plain language shows stakeholder focus, meaning that we're writing for the audience that needs to read what we're writing. It also helps us communicate more effectively, and it helps eliminate barriers to understanding. And it helps reduce time spent explaining, and it also helps us with compliance. So let's talk about some myths about plain language. Well, plain language is not baby talk or an attempt to be folksy or playful. It's not taking out technical information or legal information. And it's definitely not editing after you've written something. And plain language is never, ever imprecise. And although using pronouns is an element of plain language, it's not just using pronouns in a question and answer format. So what is plain language? Well, plain language is logical organization, using the active voice, using common and everyday words, short sentences, using you and other pronouns, and using lists and tables. And we're going to talk about each one of these. You know, so why should we even use plain language? Well, we're all busy. We are all incredibly busy people. And we personally don't want to waste a whole lot of time trying to translate wordy or difficult documents. When we go to a source, we scan things. We don't read every single word. So these are some of the reasons that we should be using plain language. And what happens when our readers don't understand? Well, we might have higher call volume. We might have to write additional interpretive letters. We might have to write more explanatory documents. And all that means an increased cost to our agencies. And it also, at the very far extreme, means potential and expensive litigation. So this is our first example, and a lot of our examples are from the federal government, because in the federal government, using plain language is the law. You have to use plain language, and in fact, every federal agency has a plain language officer. So this is from Veterans Affairs, and the first thing that we notice about that is it's really dense. There's not a lot of white space, and our eyes are immediately drawn to show veterans' full name and VA file on all evidence supported. And this was the letter that was sent out for veterans who were applying for a pension. So when they rewrote this using plain language, you can see immediately more white space. They use headers, what we need, when we need it, and your right to privacy, and then there's a 1-800 number in the bottom. When they sent out the plain language letter, it decreased their call volume in their contact center significantly. Calls per month per counselor went from 9.4 to only 1.6. And over a year's period of time with 10 counselors, calls went from 1,128 to 192. So let's look at some tools that we can use to achieve plain language. Focusing on the reader, using headings, keeping things short, using pronouns, using active voice, and other tools like avoiding hidden verbs, using consistent terms, using lists and tables, and creating an easy-to-read design. And let's go over each one of these. So let's start with focusing on the reader. Focusing on the reader means think of why that reader needs to read your document or your email or your flyer. And you want to keep in mind the average person's technical expertise. You want to write to everyone who is interested, not just the experts, because even experts prefer a clearly written document. When we focus on the reader, it means we're focusing outward. We should ask ourselves, what does the audience need to know? Or how can I serve the audience interest? And what can I clearly express to the audience? So let's look at this example about focusing on the reader. In this example, the audience is recreational boaters, meaning people that go out in their boats for fun. They're on the boat dock, and this is the original way this update for recreational boaters was written about CO2 devices. So I'm going to read it out loud, and then I'll share with you when it's rewritten in plain language, focusing on who the audience is. The Coast Guard has conducted an investigation to determine what carbon monoxide detection devices are available to recreational boaters, such that, when installed and activated, could reduce the risk of being exposed to high levels of CO, that silent killer. A variety of technologies is available for detecting the presence of CO on boats and should be considered by recreational boaters to reduce their risk of injury or death while boating. 72 words. When we rewrite this, focusing on the reader and using the elements of plain language, it reads, carbon monoxide is a silent killer. The Coast Guard recommends you use a carbon monoxide detection device on your boat to reduce the risk of being exposed to high levels of CO. You may choose from a variety of devices. 38 words. When we keep in mind these people are just out for fun on their boats, we're able to better reach them by using plain language. The next element of plain language is using headings. Headings allow the reader to quickly find relevant information. It also breaks up information on the page. And when we talk about a clear design, it helps increase blank space. And blank space, meaning white space, increases readability. It helps the reader navigate, because remember we mentioned that people scan things. So if people are scanning what you're reading, those headings help for understanding. And it also helps with accessibility, and if it's going on the website, it does aid in search engine optimization. You can try question headings because readers already have questions in mind, and questions help the reader relate to the information, and it also helps you organize the information. So this example is actually our example. This is our Zika website. And when we redesigned our website, we went back to look and see why were people coming to the Zika website. And the two things that they went to the most was, what is Zika? And what can I do to prevent Zika? And so we use those as headings on the website because that people already were coming to our Texas Zika website with those questions in mind. Now, this is a personal example. I got in a car accident and I wanted to know if I could take my text tag, the toll tag, out of one car and put it in the other car. And so I went to the text tag website looking for that answer. And look, right here, can I use my text tag in more than one vehicle? The answer is no, but I went there looking for that question and it was right there in front of me. The next element of plain language is keeping things short. Nobody wants to read materials like this. I'm not going to read this because it goes way off the page. But basically, all these words mean this. This rule meets the applicable standards in Section 3A and 3B2 of Executive Order 12988. Simplify, simplify, simplify. When we keep things short, we should use short paragraphs. Limit a paragraph to one step or subject, and use smaller bites of information because they're easier to digest. And aim for no more than 7 lines in a paragraph. That's it, 7 lines in a paragraph. And then of those 7 lines, you want to treat one subject in each sentence. This really helps, and it helps avoid complexity and confusion. And you want to have no more than 20 words per sentence or fewer if you can. When we keep things short, we want to also eliminate excess words because excess words mean meaningless formal language. Excess word wastes space and it wastes your reader's time. And it conveys insincerity. And we don't want to, we're a governmental agency and we don't want to come across as being insincere. And meaningless formal language is also seen a lot of times in bureaucratic letters, especially in the first and last sentences. When we're keeping things short, we can eliminate common excess modifiers like absolutely, completely, totally, really, very. If eliminating the modifier changes your meaning, then pick a stronger word. So let's look at an example. It's absolutely essential that you contact me at once. Well, if we eliminate the modifier absolutely, it's essential you contact me at once. But if that's not strong enough, you could say, it's imperative you contact me at once. Or, you must contact me at once. Or even shorter, contact me immediately. 3 words, keeping things short. Another way to keep things short is excess words. There are common sources of wordiness like passive voice, redundancies, prepositional phrases, hidden verbs, unnecessary modifier, and failure to use pronouns. When you're looking at excess content, think about your purpose and your topic and your audience. If your words don't further your goal, then don't include it. And sometimes excess modifiers don't even make sense. Totally unaffected, completely finished, really pregnant, or an absolute success. They don't even make sense. We can also eliminate common doublets. Common doublets are 2 words that mean the same thing. So you can just use one of them. Like cease and desist, they mean the same thing. Just use one. Due and payable, begin and commence, knowledge and information. Eliminate common doublets, just use one word. All right, so let's look at an example about keeping things short. So I'm going to read this and then we'll look at it in plain language. There's no escaping the fact that it is considered very important to note that a number of various available applicable studies, ipso facto, have generally identified the fact that additional appropriate nocturnal employment could usually keep juvenile adolescents off thoroughfares during the night hours, including but not limited to the time prior to midnight on weeknights and or 2 a.m. on weekends. All this basically means this: more night jobs keep youth off the streets. Thomas Jefferson said it best when he said the most valuable of all talents is never using 2 words when 1 word will do. All right, we're going to move on and talk about pronouns. Pronouns speak directly to your readers. It makes your writing relevant, and it requires less translation from your readers because they understand, especially if they have to take action, they understand what action they need to take. And by using pronouns too, it also eliminates words, which helps us keep things short. You want to use we when we refer to the agency. We want to use you when we're referring to the reader. And if you're doing a Q&A format, use I in the question and you in the answers in the text. ERS is the agency that oversees our benefits and retirement, and they do a really good job on their FAQs, which are all over their website. And you can see here, how do I, in the question, how do I sign up for an HSA? And you in the answer, when you make the election. So it's important. Use I in the question and you in the answers of the text. All right, so I'm going to read our next exercise. And what I'd like you to think about is who is supposed to take what action? Who's supposed to take what action? Once the candidate's goals are established, one or more potential employers are identified. A preliminary proposal for presentation to the employer is developed. The proposal is presented to an employer who agrees to negotiate an individualized job that meets the employment needs of the applicant and real business needs of the employer. Okay, so when we turn around to keep things short and write this in plain language, because we're not clear here who's establishing the goals, who's doing the proposal, who's going to negotiate. It's not clear. But when we use pronouns, once we establish your goals, we identify one or more potential employers. We prepare a preliminary proposal to present to an employer who agrees to negotiate a job that meets both his and your employment needs. Totally clear now as to who is supposed to take what action. All right, our next element of plain language is using the active voice. So active verbs, meaning the active voice, the best sentences follow what we learned in grade school. Subject, verb, predicate. Who, being the subject, does what is the verb, and to what or whom is the predicate. So let's look at A and B here. Which uses the stronger word? We published the new report, or the new report was published? Well, it's A. That is the active voice. Active voice is clear, concise, and direct. So what's the opposite of active voice? Well, it's passive. And I'll show you how to identify passive in the next few slides. Passive is really characteristic of bureaucratic ease. Mistakes were made. That is in the passive voice. So how do we identify passive? Well, the person doing the action usually follows the verb. So Arlene was promoted by her boss. Who's doing the action of promoting? Well, the boss is. Does that follow the verb? It does. That's one way to identify passive. And the verb also in passive has two parts, a to be verb and the past participle of another verb. So let's look at our Arlene example again. Arlene was promoted by her boss. Well, it does have two parts, the verb does. Was is our to be verb, and promoted is our past participle. So let's look at our next example. The house will be leased by Fred. Well, who's doing the action of leasing? Well, that would be Fred. And does that follow the verb? It does. It does. That's one way we can identify the passive. The next way, does the verb have two parts? It does. Will be is our to be verb, and leased is our past participle. Why should we avoid using passive? Well, passive can disguise who does what, and active voice makes it very clear who does what. So do we know who wrote the memo? The memo was written yesterday. We don't. But when we write it in active voice, the director wrote the memo yesterday. It's very clear who's taking action. Passive voice is also really wordy, and active voice is concise. the first sentence here is in passive. The application must be completed by the applicant and reviewed by the financial office at the time designated by that office. Okay? But when we write it in the active voice, we must receive your completed application by the deadline we established. Okay? Active voice using pronouns, much easier to understand. The passive voice is also awkward. We don't speak in passive, and active voice is natural. Consultation from respondents was obtained to determine the estimated burden. We don't talk like that. But when we start with a pronoun and an active verb, we consulted with respondents to determine the estimated burden. So much easier to understand and clear. All right, let's look at another example. Excess and or unauthorized expenses, delays, or luxury accommodations and services will not be reimbursed by the company, but will be borne by the employee. So we know it's passive because the person doing the action, in this case the company, follows the verb, which is reimbursed. And the verb has two parts, to be, which is be, and our past participle, reimbursed. So when we write this in active voice, the company will not reimburse you for unauthorized expenses, delays, or luxury accommodations or services. Very clear, it's direct, fewer words, and to the point, and easier to understand. All right, let's look at another one. Your application has been denied by the Department of State. Who's doing the action of denying? The Department of State. Does that follow the verb? It does. So that's one way we know it's passive. The next way we know it's passive, because the verb has two parts. Has been is our to be verb, and denied is our past participle. So let's turn around and start with who's doing the action. The Department of State, active voice, denied your application. All right, let's look at one more. The submission you filed will be reviewed by the judges. Well, who's doing the action of denying or reviewing? That would be the judges. Does it follow the verb? It does, so it meets that criteria. And does the verb have two parts? It does. Will be is our to be verb, and reviewed is our past participle. So when we start with the judges using an active voice, the judges will review your submission. Fewer words, more direct, easier to understand. Okay, so let's move on to tools that we can use to help us write in plain language. We're going to talk about avoiding hidden verbs, using consistent terms, avoiding bureaucracy, limiting acronyms and abbreviations, using everyday words, and using lists and using tables. So let's start with avoiding hidden verbs. Hidden verbs are verbs that are disguised as nouns. They're generally longer than their true verb forms. Hidden verbs are like conduct an analysis. Can't we just analyze? Or present a report? Let's just report. Or do an assessment. Let's just assess. Or provide help, provide assistance or provide help. Let's just help or assist. And came to the conclusion of, let's just conclude. And shall we use shall in our writing? We shall not. Shall is ambiguous. We don't use it in everyday speech. Use must for an obligation, must not for a prohibition. Use may for a discretionary action, and use should for a recommendation. And when we use phrases too, we don't need all these words in our phrases. Like, why do we need to say for the purpose of? Can't we just say for or to? Or at this point in time? Let's just say now. Or in relation to, how about or with? Or on the grounds that? How about just use the word because? Or on a monthly basis? Let's just say monthly. We also don't want to sound bureaucratic. We want to limit jargon and acronyms like habeas corpus and plaintiff, and we want to limit obscure and pretentious language like hereby, wherefore, ab initio. You want to have no more than 3 abbreviations in the document, maximum, no more than 3. You need to spell things out if you go more than 3. And you can use nicknames like unit, if it's the witness protection unit, just say unit, or peer quality case review, just say case review. Use we when you talk about our agency, and don't use acronyms or abbreviations for infrequent phrases. If it's things that only come up like once a year, go ahead and spell that out. And if you have the joy of being able to create an acronym, make it pronounceable, like STARS or TRACON or FISDO. So this is in the petroleum industry, this piece of equipment is called a Christmas tree. And there was a petroleum company that went to a graphic artist and said, would you create a cover of our handbook using a Christmas tree? Well, of course, the petroleum industry meant this piece of equipment, but that kind of jargon wasn't known to the graphic artist. And he created a handbook that had a Christmas tree on the front. So be sure we don't use jargon that is not understood by your readers. And you want to use everyday words, like instead of anticipate, just expect, or attempt, let's just try, or commence, begin or start, or demonstrate, let's just show or prove, or implement, let's just start, or in the event that little word if, and submit, send or give or terminate, let's just end or cancel. You know, simpler really is better. So let's look at this sentence. Lithodile fragments ought not be projected by the inhabitants of virtuous abodes. When we simplify using everyday language, we're really just saying people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. Or how about this one? A percedile ungulate may be propelled toward a body of aqueous fluid, but such ungulate cannot be compelled or forcibly induced to imbibe such fluid. Basically, in much simpler ways, we're saying you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot make him drink. So simplify, simplify, simplify. Another tool of plain language is using lists and tables. For lists, you want to use 3 to 7 items for increased effectiveness, and you want to introduce the list with a phrase or a sentence. So you can see here, this list, this phrase, use list, we're introducing this list. And we want to use parallel construction. And what does that mean? Well, each bullet point either starts with the same type of word. So here, each bullet point starts with a verb: use, introduce, indent, omit, number, add. So that's what parallel construction is. You want to indent run lines over the text, not the bullet, and you want to eliminate words like A and B and any repetitive words. And if you're going to number things, only number things that the sequence is important. If not, use bullets. And using lists, and lists also increases white space on the page, which increases readability. So how does this read? U.S. Citizen and Immigration Services, USCIS, is expanding its direct mail program to provide that filing for Form 1-800-A, application for determination of suitability to adopt a child from a convention country, Form 1-800-A Supplement 1, listing of adult member of the household, Supplement 2, consent to disclose information, Supplement 3, request for action on approved Form 1-800-A, Form 1-800, petition to classify convention adoptee as an immediate relative, and Supplement 1, consent to disclose information to the Hague Adoption Convention to be filed in a designated Chicago, Illinois lockbox facility for initial processing. Basically, this is a list of forms. So when we put it in bullet points, it's so much easier to understand. We start with our phrase that we're introducing it. U.S. Citizen Immigration Services is expanding its direct mail program. Then bullet, 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 bullet with each form. Mail these forms to the Chicago lockbox. So much easier to read and to understand. All right, here's another example of a list. Examples of activities that may require a Section 10A1A permit include, but are not limited to, abundance surveys, genetic research, hatchery operation, relocation, capture and marketing, and telemetric monitoring. Under certain circumstances, a 10A1A permit may also be required to possess body tissues and or body parts of ESA listed species. So when we turn this into a list, examples of activities that may require a Section 10A1A permit include, but are not limited to, abundance surveys, genetic research, hatchery operations and relocations, capture and marketing, and telemetric monitoring. Under certain circumstances, you may also need a 10A1A permit to possess tissues and or body parts of ESA listed species. So you can see, by bullet pointing it, it created white space, which increased our readability, and it's easier for our audience to read and understand. Tables do something very similar. Tables also it saves words, but it makes information very easy to locate, and it's a simpler way for complicated material, and it creates a logic and clear structure. So, for example here, in narrative form, we must receive your completed expense form on or before the 15th day of the second month following the month of reporting it. If you did not submit your form electronically, or the 25th day of the second month following the month of reporting it if you submit your form electronically. Well, that's just downright confusing, isn't it? But when we turn it into a table, it becomes crystal clear. If you send your form electronically, then we must get it by the 25th day of the second month. If you send your form by paper or fax, then we need it by the 15th day of the second month. So much more clear when we put it into a table. All right, so let's take a quick review. So what are the goals of plain language? Well, helping the reader find the information and helping the reader understand the information. If your document doesn't do both, it's not in plain language. What are the tools that we can use to achieve plain language? Focusing on the reader, using headings, keeping things short, using pronouns, using the active voice, not passive voice, the active voice, and other tools, avoiding hidden verbs, using consistent terms, using common and everyday words, and using lists and tables. There's resources if you want more information, the DISH's internal website. Also plainlanguage.gov, because this is the federal government's website about plain language. And the Center for PlainLanguage.org is the training organization for federal employees. And then the last resource is, I think, one of the most important. It's called the HemingwayApp.com. It's a website. You can get to it on your computer. It is free. You don't have to pay for the desktop version. It's free, and it will change and help you write in plain language. What you do is you copy and paste from your document into the website, and then it highlights things for you. It shows you your excess words in blue. It shows you the passives in green. It shows you the passives in purple, and yellow and red are hard to read or very hard to read sentences. I use this daily to help me write in plain language. I encourage you to do the same, because it is a tool that will help you identify the things in our writing so we can do better in writing in plain language. All right, I thank you so much for your time here today. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to DISH's Communications at dishes.communications@dshs.texas.gov. And we appreciate you spending this time with us. Thank you so much.